Good morning and good afternoon to everyone who has joined the Standard Bank booth for today and for our discussion around due diligence questionnaires. And I really want to introduce, so I'm Sally Jakes and I head up in information management at Standard Bank. And with me, I've got two guests. Sanjeev is the CEO and founder of Central and is going to come in particularly around technology on our discussion today. And then Peter Tomlinson comes from AFME and has been working around the AFME DDQ, so the kind of post-trade work around AFME. We wanted to start this discussion because I wanted to look at how is the industry progressing towards standardized due diligence. Have standardized DDQs such as the AFME post-trade questionnaire made it easier for network managers and for respondents? How will due diligence evolve digitally when sub-custodians are responding on multiple systems? And is there a role for industry stand certifications to reduce the number of due diligence questionnaires? So I'm going to start off with standardization. And please, this is an interactive session. So please put your questions in the Q&A section and let's have a look at those. I will be keeping an eye out on there. So are we really achieving standardization? I'm looking at standardization for the efficiencies it will bring to both issuers of DDQs and respondents. And I'm going to look at two angles, content and technology. Let's start with technology. So over the last 5 years, we've seen more global custodians and brokers using portals such as Central, Thomas Murray, Codude, KY3P to issue their questionnaires. As a respondent, I start losing the efficiency when I've got to copy and paste these responses into different portals. Sanjeev, do you believe we can standardize our technology for questionnaires such as AFME?
Thank you, Sally. I think your question about standardization in general, and particularly as it pertains to technology, in my mind sort of speaks to two important underlying realities. The first, as you mentioned, more and more global custodians are adopting systems and digitized platforms for issuing their due diligence questionnaires. And that trend will continue to increase and accelerate over time. But the second important reality, and I think you just referred to it, is that due diligence by definition is a two-sided process. And whenever we're thinking about standards, it's important to realize that it's not just to bring the efficiencies for the issuers, but also for the respondents. And that's where technology standards can go a long way. To your specific question, I do think technology standards can help in reducing the friction for both sides in the following ways. For the standardized questionnaires, such as for AFME, if the industry were to adopt a common electronic format in which the respondents could provide the responses and that could be ingested by all of the different systems that are being used, I think that would go a long way towards reducing the kind of friction you were referring to, such as the cut and paste and go across the systems. I will say that it will help tremendously for the standard format of an AFME questionnaire, for example, but it won't solve all the problems. So for example, I happen to be in the camp that the goal of 100% content standardization is an unrealistic goal. The industry is evolving rapidly. Different institutions approach risk in different ways. So there will continue to be proprietary questions and diversity in the way people will want to do their due diligence process. And here again, I sometimes say that there is a race going on between the desire for 100% content standardization and the advancement of technology. And you could argue that whoever wins that race may render the other pursuit obsolete. And I certainly would put my money on technology. And what I'm thinking of is that today there are well-established technologies available that can automate the response process to a great degree by leveraging intelligent search or artificial intelligence. So even when you get outside the world of standard questionnaires such as AFME, I do think that these new technologies will come to be leveraged. And I see a future where more and more response automation systems will fall into place, which will enable respondents, even for those due diligence questionnaires that are proprietary, to bring a great deal of efficiency to that.
No, that's great. Thanks, Sanjeev. And I like that the kind of the race of who's going to win in this. So if I move on to content, and it links a bit to the first question we've had. So with our standard AFM questionnaire, Pete, this questionnaire has got over 450 questions, but are they all useful for network managers? Are we introducing inefficiencies for both evaluators and respondents with large percentages of superfluous questions, which links to what Kevin Burkhardt has asked, where he said, would it not be beneficial if we eliminate some of the non-risk items, i.e. the name of the custodian, the address, to start reducing the questions? So over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Sally. It's a very good question. And something that's definitely at the sort of forefront of our minds as we start thinking about the next iteration of the AFM DDQ. We've sort of settled into this cycle of updating it significantly once every 2 years. So we're looking now at the version for use in 2023. Over the years, the questionnaire has grown and grown with each iteration. So you mentioned 450 questions in the current version. I took a look back, 2016, we had just about 300 questions. So it's grown 50% in 5 years, which is, not insignificant, right? As we start to have these conversations about the next version, I think that the starting point is moving not just from kind of looking at what's missing, but also, what can we get rid of? And I think that there is a shared desire from the AFM kind of subcommittee to really look at options or ways in which this next version can be slimmed down. There are some emerging areas where we might need to add more questions, but hopefully, we can counteract that by removing some as well. I guess the sort of the issue at hand really is about how do you define the threshold at which a question becomes useful. So we don't want to remove something that there will still be a sort of a rump of network managers who want to know the answer to, and if we remove it, they're simply going to ask it or a variation of it in sort of side questionnaires, and then we lose that efficiency, right? So I think there's a balance to be struck, but sort of in principle, if there's something that multiple kind of custodians or multiple network managers, are going to ask, then it's better to do it in the same way, in a standardized way, in a questionnaire. It makes the document quite unwieldy, but hopefully, it's serving a purpose and reducing the number of additional questions which are going to be asked. But yeah, there's a balance to be found, and that's kind of our job to try and find it.
Super. Thanks, Peter. I suppose we would really need some sort of technology solutions to see how all those questions are being used, and how many of them are being used to get a real answer out of that. Now, I'd like to ask other participants in the booth I've got a question for you. Do you think there's room for using industry standards certificates to reduce the number of questions? I've sometimes asked that myself of clients, but so I'm going to put that question to you. I can copy it and put it into the poll there, and into the questions and answers, and let's see what we get there while I move onto the next question, and hopefully we can come back to that. So please have a look and see what you think there. So now I want to move on to the topic of ongoing monitoring versus time-bound due diligence. And we know that network managers want to know of any immediate risks, and that's certainly been highlighted in the last few weeks with the Russia-Ukraine war. But that said, there's still a reliance on the DDQs for the full risk picture. So to be able to assess risk in real time, we have to do this digitally. But we're all on different digital journeys where we're not in the same place, and sometimes I feel not even on the same road. So I want to explore how we navigate these different journeys between those completing due diligence and those responding. So Sanjeev, what are the top 2 or 3 pain points that your clients are trying to solve by looking for a digital solution?
Thanks, Sally. I think your point about different institutions being on different digital journeys is absolutely right. Every institution is moving at its own pace and adopting digital technologies at a speed that is suitable for them. I will say that virtually in every industry, I mean, if you step back and kind of think about the adoption of digital technologies for any business process or industry, while specific companies have their digital journeys, the industry as a whole has a macro journey that it is on. And you get to a tipping point in an industry where the path for every one of the companies gets significantly accelerated. It's hard for me to tell whether that tipping point has been achieved in the case of due diligence in this space, but sort of the S curve, as they speak about in the industry, is definitely an important accelerator in driving momentum. To your specific question of the pain points that we're seeing clients trying to solve, I'd sort of break it up into 3 categories. The first is just the basic level of efficiency that clients are looking for. So to be able to go from what could be a semi-digitized or a manual process over to a fully digital platform. And I think what they're looking for is our systems which can meet a few important criteria. First, it is that they have to be able to provide this level of automation and digitization in a complete way. In some ways, you can create more inefficiencies by doing partial digitization of a process. So the systems have to be complete. The second, they have to have a degree of flexibility, because every institution has its own process, and to be able to reap the benefits of adopting technology, it has to be able to adapt the technology to its needs. And then the third is essentially to generate the kind of quantitative analytics required for risk management, because that's kind of the ultimate purpose of all due diligence, and to be able to reallocate their time from the tedious process itself to analyzing the results. So I think the first thing that they're looking to solve for that we see is just getting to that level of efficiency and better risk management. I think the second pain point is to go from thinking about due diligence kind of as a isolated system to the entire infrastructure for network management. As you can imagine, the diligence process doesn't exist in isolation. The diligence systems are connected to multiple other systems within the overall network management function. This could be the depth and flexibility of their agent bank database, of the account management systems, about the attestation systems. So what we're seeing with some clients is a desire to move that whole infrastructure to the next level. And as one client refers to it, it's sort of future-proofing the network management infrastructure. So that's the second level of digitization that we see some clients, and that represents the different stages of the digital journey as you spoke to. And then the third one is where you started with the desire to get to ongoing monitoring. This is still relatively early. People haven't really moved to sort of adopting real-time monitoring, but we see that as an absolutely powerful trend that is coming. And what's driving the urgency of it is cyber risk. With cyber risk evolving at such a rapid pace, it's not something that you can measure and appropriately monitor in an episodic way or in an ad hoc way, because it changes so rapidly. So we're definitely seeing the trend towards ongoing monitoring being driven by real-time, constant oversight of the cyber hygiene of their third parties. I also think that when you get to it, more interactive messaging across the network will be required in order to provide the kind of ongoing monitoring that you were speaking of.
Super, thank you. And certainly all the questions I've had lately on our current risks have been issued to me manually as well around that, so we can see that change. Now, if I move on to Peter, I've heard of members of your AFM questionnaire subcommittee ask for more binary or multiple question type questions so they can be auto-scored. However, as a respondent, I see issuers ask for more and more commentary. Do you think there's room for a pre-AFM DDQ, which only has binary questions and is quick to complete and evaluate, and then issuers can ask for further information on their risk areas only?
Our focus, first and foremost, has always been on the content, not what I'll call the delivery mechanism, but absolutely right. There is clearly more and more interest in how can we share this information in a more efficient and effective way. And, we're certainly, open to sort of helping to facilitate that as best we can. Clearly, again, sort of going down that middle path, there is a need for a balance between, these binary or multiple choice questions, which can be automated, and a need for sort of further commentary and that nuanced detail, which is impossible to kind of fit into a sort of a multiple choice or a yes no type question. So you need that balance again. You're right, it's something that this kind of working group has also identified as a sort of priority for this year, having another rake through the document and looking at further areas where questions can be refined from sort of open-ended type questions into something scoreable or sort of more binary. So we'll absolutely be looking at that as well. Whether it makes sense to separate that into two separate questionnaires, personally, I'm not sure. Probably not something we'll do within AFME, but I think that there are kind of smarter and better resource people than me who can potentially facilitate that if there's a sort of market appetite for it. And we're happy to do what we can to, as I say, to try and facilitate that. I mean, I can kind of completely get it. Sort of going back to some of Sanjeev's points, if we're updating this once every 2 years, think how much the world has changed within the last 2 years. All of the sort of new topics coming to the kind of forefront of people's minds. There is definitely a need for a more sort of dynamic or ongoing monitoring process than this sort of quite sort of fixed document that we have currently. Also, it's a bit of an anachronism that it's a Word document. Everyone is kind of going digital and looking at other digital solutions. So it's something that I think will always remain focused primarily on the actual content. But if we can create better content that better meets the needs of the market and makes it easier to respond, then we are 100% open to helping to get there.
And I see we've got a question of kind of, to manage the workload, is it possible to have a standardized DDQ be a purely annual event separate from real-time monitoring rather than expecting a live DDQ? Peter, I don't know if you want to start on that, or whether whether you've got any kind of comments on that. I certainly feel as if we do actually have that. We have the annual DDQs, but events happen and we get the questions.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to know how. It's something that maybe we have to learn from sort of these kind of big events which have happened in 2020, 2021, 2022, which have sort of created this need for immediate answers outside of the annual process that we currently have. That kind of isn't within the current scope of what we looked at AFME, right? But is there a role to sort of to help in these types of scenario to again consolidate questions and kind of make this process more efficient? It's very difficult to know precisely how that would work, but I absolutely agree it's something that needs further consideration.
Yes, quick standardized questions that don't take 6 months of subcommittee meetings.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sanjeev, is there any kind of comment that you'd like to make on that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's very clear that there is a place for standardized annual or whatever frequency there is to it to be asking those kinds of questions, because you can get certain types of very rich qualitative information from it. But that will never substitute for the kind of ongoing need to constantly both ask and respond to events that are happening around us. And honestly, the current methods of doing that are inherently inefficient. I mean, if you're sending information via emails or multiple questions flying around. So from a pure technology perspective, I mean, the end game would be if you could have a common platform that could be used, either a common repository where people could put in questions and answers, but also real-time messaging, to be able to ask questions that you can respond to or proactively push information as a respondent. I don't know what the path to it is, and whether some Peter and AFME has a role in kind of helping define and create that environment. But in the absence of it, I think you'll still continue to have sort of this type of bilateral conversations that will need to happen, and everybody asking and I was thinking about, how have other industries solved for it? And I'm not sure that there's a lot of good examples that you can point to. I know that if you kind of look at the broad industry sort of third-party risk process, which is becoming increasingly important with all of the cyber risks, people are trying to get to common databases, but it is not an easy problem to solve.
Yeah, which sort of leads me to my next question is this industry ready for a central place to hold documents and Q&A pairs, or for external providers to deliver risk assessments that can be shared among different global custodians? I don't know if you want to comment on that. See if we've got any comments from our audience. I see Caroline has asked us, can there be a stronger pushback to members separating due diligence risk oversight questions to those that are product and service related, which could create more closed statements in the AFME document? I must say, from a respondent's perspective, I am seeing a little bit of the difference. There is still some product service questions that are coming through, but if I compare it to, say, if an RFP is issued, the questions are quite different, because I think you're looking there at, in my mind, pre-sales for an RFP and post-sales for a due diligence. Sanjeev, would you like to comment on that at all?
Well, I think that there is definitely room for common repositories where you could store information that can be retrieved. I'll tell you what I see in other industries. So, for example, there's an attempt to create these databases where third parties can store their SOC reports, and anybody who needs a SOC report can kind of access it in an efficient way. So infrastructures like that, I think, could actually absolutely come to prevail, especially in this space, because it's a relatively small vertical industry with folks who work with each other quite closely. So I think that if any industry could do it, this industry can accomplish that for sure.
Okay, that's great. And perhaps, Peter, we're looking at AFME playing a different role in terms of just content, which is really switching things around. I don't know if that's ever been considered.
Yeah. I would say, now is a good time to be providing that feedback. We're obviously kind of somewhat constrained from a capacity perspective and a sort of resourcing perspective as to what we can deliver. So I really see our role is still the content, but maybe providing that content in the best format that allows people like Sanjeev and others to do things with that content and make it more efficient and more effective for sort of market participants. We want to avoid duplicating sort of information that's already provided elsewhere, and kind of going back to what you said at the start, we want to make sure we're kind of only including questions where the issuers are doing something with the responses, right? We don't want to ask questions for the sake of it. The key principle for the AFME DDQ has to remain, it has to add value. Each question has to add value to provide some new information which is useful to the askers of the questions. So it's obviously a sort of a changing environment, and we have to be cognizant of that, but there are probably limitations as well on the sort of the role that AFME can play in this and what we can achieve. But as I say, now is the time we're sort of openly consulting for feedback, and it's good to get feedback not just from the issuers of questionnaires, but also those who are responding to questionnaires, people like you, Sally. It's great to get that feedback. So welcome any sort of direct feedback via email or telephone is certainly welcome by me at this stage.
Okay. Right. Thank you. And I think I'm going to, that's going to be great. And I hope there are also people who are listening who are going to provide to this. Kevin's made a comment about bringing in more questions for AFME, so we have fewer supplemental questions, which would be great from my perspective. We haven't had an answer to the industry certificate. I've only ever asked one person who said, no, they didn't think so. So I want to take this opportunity to thank Sanjeev. Thank you for coming in, bringing your insights. We've had some wonderful conversations as well leading up to this, which I've really enjoyed as well. So thank you. And thank you, Peter, as well. I think bringing in that standardised side of AFME has been fantastic. And I'll see you in the subcommittee. So we will also still have more conversations. So thank you to everyone for attending and for your questions. It's been great spending the last half an hour with you, which has just flown by. And enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally.
Cheers. Thank you.